Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. We're about to journey into a world that seems so distant, so long ago, yet it's a world that continues to shape us even today. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you enjoy exploring the untold stories of the past, and share a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. I love hearing how you're all experiencing these moments in time with me, so let's make this a conversation. Now, find a quiet space, take a deep breath, and let the noise of the present fade into the background. This isn't a journey to the past for glory or grandeur. No, tonight we walk through the quiet shadows of history's forgotten stories. We'll step into a time when survival wasn't about fighting battles on grand fields, it was about fighting to hold on to what little you had. Tonight, we're diving into the lives of those who lived on the edge of survival, those who battled with more than just the enemy they fought against the very systems that sought to silence them. A time when rights were denied, voices were ignored, but courage found its way through the cracks. Let me take you to the early 20th century, a time when life in America was rapidly changing. The air is thick with the scent of industrial smoke. Yet there's an underlying hum of hope. The world is on the cusp of modernity, but beneath that glossy surface, the realities for many are harsh. The streets are crowded with men and women, their faces weary, their hands calloused by the work that pays the bills but never quite satisfies the soul. The promise of the American dream feels more like a distant fantasy than a reality for most. You wake up on a cool morning in a small apartment, its walls thin and the floors creaking beneath your every move. There's no luxury here. There's no comfort. The bed is small, the blanket's thin, but it's your bed. And for now, that's enough. As sunlight filters through the small window, you can hear the city waking up around you. The distant sound of factory whistles and the murmur of voices outside blend with the ever-present hum of the machine that drives the city forward. Outside, the world is in motion. Workers hurry along the streets, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. The factory doors open, and the clang of metal on metal fills the air. The world is loud, relentless, but you have a purpose, and so does everyone else. This is a time of change, but it's also a time of survival, and every small victory feels like a step closer to a better life. But what does it mean to survive? What does it take to carve a life out of the steel and smoke of the industrial age? How much is a person willing to give up for a dream that feels more like an illusion? These are the stories we're going to tell tonight. The stories of those who lived on the edge of this new world, who found ways to endure, to fight, to push forward even when it seemed impossible. This is a journey not just into the past, but into the heart of what it means to be human. The struggles they faced are not so different from the struggles we face today. And as we uncover their stories, remember sometimes the smallest voices are the ones that echo the loudest through history. So, let's begin. Settle in and let the past speak to you. In medieval Europe, life was steeped in a world that seemed to exalt purity while suppressing the very impulses that were part of every human being. The body, from the moment of birth, was seen not as something to be cherished but as something to be controlled. Lust, the very essence of desire, was vilified, branded as a sin that threatened to tear the soul from its righteous path. Children grew up knowing that their bodies were not their own, not to be freely enjoyed but to be managed, kept in check, and kept pure. Your body belongs to God, was a lesson drummed into their hearts before they could even understand the weight of it. For the young boys and girls of medieval Europe, every stirring in their hearts, every whisper of attraction or curiosity was met with shame. Their own bodies were considered foreign, dangerous even, betrayers of the soul. To feel desire was to fall from grace, to turn one's back on the divine. This message, instilled through repeated sermons, prayers, and teachings, shaped the very fabric of their lives. The body was a battleground, and its natural inclinations were considered the enemy. Desire was viewed as the root of all sin. And so, to long for another, to feel the warmth of attraction, was a temptation that had to be avoided at all costs. From their earliest years, children were taught that lust was not a natural part of the human experience, but an aberration that needed to be controlled. This was especially true for girls, who were taught that their primary purpose was not their own pleasure but to serve as vessels for reproduction. From the moment they could comprehend the world around them, they were told that their bodies were meant to serve others, not to seek out joy for themselves. A woman's body was always considered to belong to someone else, first to her father and then to her husband. This notion left little room for a woman to express any natural desire of her own. Her body was to be a reflection of submission, obedience, and purity. As children became teenagers, this message became louder, more urgent. Your body is not your own, they were told. The weight of this knowledge grew heavier as they approached adulthood. The allure of the body, the awakening of desire, was no longer innocent. It was shameful. It was sinful. To even think of it was to commit a grave moral sin. Instead of celebrating growth, the church demanded that the body be constrained, that the natural flow of human desire be locked away. The soul, the church claimed, could only ascend to heaven if it were freed from the shackles of earthly pleasure. And so, as they became young adults, the boys and girls of medieval Europe were expected to live by rules that governed not just their actions but their very thoughts. They were told to view their bodies with suspicion, to see their own desires as threats to their salvation. Their instincts, their most human impulses, were framed as something to be repressed. Every thought that wandered too far was a temptation that led straight to hell. The rituals of confession were designed to remind the faithful of this burden. When a person confessed their sins, it was not just to absolve themselves of wrongdoings, but to acknowledge the inherent sinfulness of being human. In this world, it was not enough to simply avoid sin. One had to constantly police their own body, their own thoughts, their own desires. At the same time, the role of the church was all-encompassing. It was not just a spiritual guide, but a political and moral authority, one that regulated every aspect of life. The clergy's voice was the voice of God, and the rules they set for sexual conduct were strict, unyielding, and unbending. To stray from these rules was to invite damnation, and so the church preached an extreme version of celibacy. Celibacy, they told their followers, was the highest form of purity. To remain unmarried, to live a life untouched by the passions of the flesh, was the ideal, the path to heaven. Those who could truly master their desires were revered, seen as the closest to Christ. But the cruelty of this doctrine was that it was often imposed on those who were most vulnerable. The clergy, who preached chastity as the holiest of paths, were expected to live lives of complete separation from worldly desires. In truth, though, this vow of celibacy was often one that men and women struggled to uphold. The rules of the church may have been unyielding, but the human desire for connection, for love, for intimacy was powerful. Monasteries were filled with whispers of forbidden liaisons. Priests, though sworn to chastity, were not immune to the pull of the flesh. When they faltered, when they broke their vows, the confession that followed was supposed to be a cleansing of the soul, but still, the stain remained. In these private moments, the very church that preached control was shown to be complicit in the brokenness of its own rules. And what of those who were not part of the clergy? The message to the laity was no less severe. Marriage, while necessary, was never viewed as a romantic union. It was, instead, a contract, a means to produce heirs, to carry on the bloodline. It was a solemn duty. Love, passion, desire were irrelevant. The act of sex itself was not about connection or pleasure, but about fulfilling God's divine purpose of reproduction. Even in marriage, the woman's body was not her own. Her desires were secondary to her duty to bear children. The act of sex in marriage was seen not as an opportunity for intimacy, but as a necessary evil. It was a duty imposed by God. And for this, the woman was expected to endure the discomfort and inconvenience without question. But even in this world of strict regulations and unrelenting repression, there were cracks. The human spirit, so tightly bound by the church's teachings, found ways to rebel. Men and women, though taught to reject their natural instincts, could not completely shut them away. Love, as it existed in the hearts of men and women, did not adhere to the doctrines of the church. It was a quiet rebellion, a secret act that could not be fully suppressed. While the official teachings of the church told people that they were to desire only for the sake of procreation, many found ways to enjoy the act of sex outside of marriage, outside of the divine purpose. In the shadows of the churches and the quiet corners of the monasteries, a different story was unfolding. There, among the faithful, were those who sought pleasure, who defied the teachings of their holy leaders. Their bodies, once seen as pure vessels for God's will, had become the very source of rebellion. The act of pleasure, once branded as sinful, became a refuge, a way for those who lived under the harsh doctrines of the church to briefly escape. These were the whispers, the quiet rebellions of a world that sought to constrain and control, but could not fully extinguish the flame of desire. Yet for most people, the rules of the church were not to be broken. To do so was to risk not only one's own soul, but the salvation of one's family. Every action was watched, every thought was scrutinized, and every sin was recorded. In the medieval world, desire was the enemy. To express it was to invite judgment, to risk the wrath of the divine. And so, the people learned to live in silence, to suppress the longings they could not fully understand. Pleasure, even within the confines of marriage, was always viewed as something to be ashamed of. The church, though it allowed sex within marriage for the sake of reproduction, never fully accepted the notion that pleasure was part of the natural order of things. To enjoy the act of sex was to stray from the sacred mission of procreation. In the eyes of the church, it was the purity of the soul that mattered above all else, and the body, flesh, and desire was always a distraction, something that led one away from the path to salvation. For women, this burden was heavier still. They were not encouraged to find joy in their bodies, nor were they given the same freedom as men to experience sexual pleasure. For them, their bodies were always meant for others, first their fathers, then their husbands. Even in the most intimate acts, women were expected to remain detached, to fulfill their duties without question. Desire for a woman was seen as a weakness, something that would make her a temptress, a sinner. A woman's body was always a source of shame, shame for the man who could not control his desires, and shame for the woman who dared to acknowledge her own. Thus, the medieval world was a place of repression, of fear, and of silence. Desire was always something to be ashamed of, a burden to bear, rather than a natural part of human existence. And yet, despite the heavy teachings of the church, the pull of the flesh could not be fully extinguished. People longed for connection, for intimacy, for love, but in a world that saw such desires as sinful, they were forced to remain hidden, to suffer in silence. The paradox of medieval sexuality was this: that in a world where the body was seen as impure, the human need for connection and affection could never truly be erased. The soul, ever in battle with the body, could never fully suppress the most human of impulses. The flesh always fought back. And so, the people of medieval Europe lived in a world where pleasure was forever the enemy, and yet it was the very thing they longed for. Despite the stern teachings and the endless warnings of the church, the struggle against temptation was not one easily won. In the quiet hours of the night, when the fires had burned low and the world outside was still, The people of medieval Europe found their thoughts drifting where they had been told not to go. Men and women alike, under the watchful eyes of the church, lived lives that were, at best, full of restraint, and at worst, full of secret rebellion. The laws of the land were clear. Desire was to be suppressed, passion to be denied. Yet, as with any human law, the pull of nature itself was stronger than the edicts of even the most powerful institution. In the quiet corners of monasteries, behind the thick stone walls of castles, and in the tucked-away rooms of the common folk, temptation stirred. The clergy, who preached the loudest about abstinence, were often the very ones to break the vow of celibacy. Monks and priests, cloaked in their dark robes, were sworn to purity, yet the secrecy of their acts whispered louder than any sermon. The walls of the abbey, though built to keep the world out, were not strong enough to silence the hunger of the flesh. In the shadows of these sacred places, affairs were not uncommon, as those who had sworn to be above such things found solace in the very acts they condemned. The human spirit, as it turned out, could not be so easily confined. As the church proclaimed celibacy to be the highest form of devotion, its leaders could hardly deny the existence of temptation within their own walls. When a priest sneaked out at night to meet a lover, or when a monk was caught in an act of passion, the confessions that followed were not just acts of penitence but of human frailty. The teachings of the church may have been absolute, but the desires of the flesh were undeniable. In the hidden corners, men of faith indulged in the very sins they preached against. Yet, no matter how many whispered confessions filled the air, the official doctrine remained the same. Pleasure was evil, and desire was dangerous. Even among the common folk, where the church's reach was not as strong, the struggle against temptation was ever present. Life for the peasant was difficult, the fields were harsh, and the days were long. But in the fleeting moments of respite, in the quiet of a barn, behind the privacy of a haystack, desire found its way. Despite the strict prohibitions laid down by the church, premarital sex was far more common than the official teachings would admit. It was said that the young people of the village were to keep their passions in check, to wait for marriage before they gave in to such desires. But in the warmth of a dimly lit room or under the blanket of a quiet night, the pressures of life were forgotten. The need for affection, for touch, for the warmth of another's body, outweighed the lessons that had been drilled into them since childhood. Premarital sex, though forbidden, was not a rarity, particularly among the lower classes, where the daily burdens of survival were so much greater. The act of love or of lust was an escape, a brief respite from the harshness of life. The rules were clear, but they were often ignored in favor of the flesh's call. In these moments of passion, the soul may have been forgotten, but the body remembered what it needed, and it demanded it. Despite the heavy guilt that often followed, many in the lower classes found a strange kind of freedom in these acts. The rules of the church, though powerful, could not deny the most basic human needs. Men and women, tired of the strictures placed upon them, turned to one another for comfort. It was not an act of defiance, but a simple surrender to the inevitable, the body speaking louder than any sermon. And in the midst of this struggle against temptation, there was the ever-present weight of the virginity test, an institution that held the power of life and death over the lives of women. On their wedding night, women were expected to prove, without a doubt, that they were pure, untouched, and innocent. The virginity test was an all-important ritual, a mark of worth, a confirmation of the woman's value in the eyes of her husband and her community. It was not enough to marry. A woman's virtue had to be proven, and it was proven through blood. For many women, this was a moment of great fear. The wedding night, supposed to be a time of joy and union, was instead filled with dread. The husband, often a stranger, sometimes little more than an economic partner, waited to confirm what was expected of his bride. The sheets, sometimes stained with animal blood to prove the bride's purity, would be shown to the family. If no blood appeared, the woman was considered damaged, her worth reduced. The whispers of the community would follow her for the rest of her life. And if the virginity test was failed, the woman could be accused of dishonesty, of unfaithfulness. The consequences were grave. She could be sent away, abandoned, or worse. Her marriage could be annulled. The shame of failure branded on her for all to see. A woman's worth was not tied to her heart, nor her character, but to the blood that proved her innocence. For many women, the virginity test was an ordeal they had no power over, and one they were forced to endure in silence. It was a moment where their own body, the one that had been silenced for so long, was held to the highest scrutiny. It did not matter if the woman was tired, or if she had suffered in silence for years. What mattered was whether she could produce the proof of innocence that society demanded. The rituals of marriage were not about love, but about reaffirming the societal order. A woman was not valued for her mind or her spirit, but for her body's ability to conform to a set of rigid rules. Even in these moments of intimate union, women had no control over their bodies. The flesh that had been suppressed, the desires that had been denied, could not be freely expressed. Their bodies were simply tools for survival, tools for reproduction, but not their own. It was no wonder that many women found ways to escape this ritual. Some relied on herbs, others on tricks, and some even took drastic measures to protect themselves from the shame of failing the virginity test. They were trapped in a system that offered no freedom, no opportunity for true intimacy. Their bodies were always on display, always up for judgment. The idea that a woman's worth could be measured by something so superficial, so rooted in physicality, became the bitter reality of their lives. The virginity test was not just an act of proving purity, it was a moment of total submission to the whims of society. For the man, it was a rite of power. For the woman, it was a test of survival. She had no choice but to conform, to submit, to surrender her body to this ritual, this expectation, and prove that she was not just a wife in name, but a pure, untouched soul worthy of marriage. And so, for the women who lived in the shadow of these customs, there was little room for escape. The body, though it carried the burden of desire, was not allowed the freedom to express it. It was bound by rules and expectations, and to break those rules meant certain punishment. A woman's desires, her pleasure, her very body were viewed as a danger to the social order. Theirs was a struggle of survival in a world where purity and obedience were the highest ideals. It was a struggle that would last their entire lives. But the story did not end there. Despite the strict prohibitions, despite the overwhelming power of the church and the laws that controlled every aspect of life, people still found ways to explore their desires, sometimes in secret, sometimes in the shadows, but always in defiance of the rules. The body may have been bound by laws, but the heart was never fully constrained. For every rule laid down by the church, there were those who found ways to break it, to defy it. And though the consequences were harsh, the desire for connection, for intimacy, for love, was not so easily extinguished. The struggle against temptation was eternal, and in that struggle, the soul of medieval Europe was formed. Marriage, in the eyes of medieval society, was not the delicate union of two hearts in love. It was, above all, a matter of duty. The vows taken were not promises born of affection, but pledges made out of necessity. For those born into noble families, marriage was first and foremost a tool for survival, for securing alliances, and for maintaining land and power. A man did not marry for the warmth of another's embrace, nor did a woman seek a partner for companionship. Instead, marriage was the formal binding of two families, two estates, two bloodlines. It was an arrangement that ensured wealth remained intact and power could be passed from one generation to the next. In the shadowed halls of castles and estates, the plans for marriage were made long before the couple even laid eyes on one another. Marriages were arranged by fathers, by lords, and by the heads of families, who saw such unions as strategic moves in an ongoing game of political power. A match could be forged to strengthen one's standing, to secure a truce with a rival, or to expand the influence of a house. Love had no place in the discussion. Even the thought of choosing a partner based on affection would have seemed strange to the medieval mind. In the days leading up to the marriage, a great deal of thought was given to the logistics, the wealth, and the connections each family could provide. Who owned land? Whose title would be enhanced by the union? Could this marriage bring more soldiers to a cause or more gold to a purse? These were the questions that mattered. Affection was an afterthought, a quiet whisper in the corner, drowned out by the clang of political strategy and the needs of the family estate. For those outside the nobility, the principles of marriage were no less bound by necessity. Among the peasantry, marriage was an economic arrangement, a partnership in toil and labor. The goal, though not one openly discussed, was always the same: survival. Women and men married to share the burdens of daily life, farming, working, raising children. In some ways, these unions were even more essential for survival than those of the rich. The ties between husband and wife in the lower classes were built from necessity, from the weight of physical work and the need to ensure the continued work of the land. There was little room for romantic notions, and even less room for sexual pleasure. In this world, a woman's worth was often measured not by her charm or wit, but by her ability to bear children. Her role was clear: to reproduce, to continue the bloodline. Whether she was a noblewoman or a peasant, her primary duty was to provide heirs. Her worth, in the eyes of society, rested upon the fruit of her womb. And so, from the moment a woman was married, the expectation was always the same children. And many of them, it mattered little whether or not the marriage was one of love or affection. What mattered was the creation of a strong, healthy line of heirs. Without children, a marriage was considered incomplete, a failure even. For noble families, the stakes were higher still. The legitimate heir, the firstborn son, was a matter of political importance. A child was more than just a blessing. It was a symbol of the continuation of the family's power. A man's legacy was measured by his children, and in particular, by his sons. To produce an heir was to ensure that one's name would be carried forward, that the land, the titles, and the wealth would be passed down through the generations. Without this, a noble house could easily fall into ruin, their wealth and land slipping away like sand through the fingers of time. For women, the pressure was even more intense. A woman's worth was inextricably linked to her ability to bear children, especially sons. Her value was not in her intelligence, nor in her kindness, but in the number of healthy children she could provide. If a noblewoman failed to produce an heir, her position could be in jeopardy. The blame often fell squarely on her shoulders, as society rarely considered the possibility that the problem might lie with the husband. The woman's body was a tool for reproduction, and its failure to perform its duty could lead to disgrace, social embarrassment, or worse, divorce. The idea of love between husband and wife, though present in the poems and songs of the time, was rarely a reality in the lives of medieval couples. If love existed, it was something private, something hidden. The public role of marriage was clear. The husband was the head of the household, the provider and protector, and the wife was his companion, his helpmate, the mother of his children. Their union was based on a contract, a set of expectations, and both were expected to fulfill their duties in the marriage, without question. The idea of companionship, of love growing between two individuals who had chosen one another, was rare and almost an afterthought. For many women, the emotional toll of this arrangement was immense. To marry was to surrender much of oneself, one's hopes, one's desires, and, for many, even one's identity. Once married, a woman's life was not her own. Her existence was shaped entirely by the needs of her husband and her family. If she was fortunate, her husband would be kind, and the home would be warm. But this was not always the case. Her role was to serve and to bear children, and in many cases, that was all. The life of a noblewoman was a gilded cage, and even for the women of the lower classes, though their lives were undoubtedly harder, the expectations placed upon them were much the same. The expectation for progeny weighed heavily on women, especially when the reality of childbirth became apparent. The risks of childbirth were well known to medieval people. It was common knowledge that many women would die during childbirth, leaving behind husbands, children, and families to mourn their loss. The process of giving life could also take it away. Women, therefore, were often valued more for their ability to bear children than for any other quality. Their lives were measured by the strength of their wombs, the number of children they could bear. And for those women whose bodies failed to produce heirs, the consequences were often harsh. For some women, this meant being abandoned, sent away from their husbands and their families, unable to fulfill the most important role society demanded of them. For others, it meant enduring endless trials of shame, public humiliation, or even accusations of witchcraft or infertility. The burden of reproduction was no light one, and the pressure to conform to society's expectations was unrelenting. And yet, in the quiet moments, in the hidden corners of the home, there were those who found ways to express their love and affection, even if it was nothing more than a fleeting kiss or a soft embrace. Marriage, for all its burdens, was still a source of solace for many. The shared task of raising children, the act of working together to build a family, could create bonds of companionship and love, even if those bonds were rarely spoken of. Some women, in the silence of their hearts, might have found joy in their marriages, even if it was a joy born of necessity rather than desire. It was not uncommon for people to form emotional attachments over time, to care for their partners in ways that were not always visible to the outside world. For the men, however, the situation was different. Their roles were more clearly defined, their expectations more direct. They were the head of the family, the ones who controlled the household, the ones who inherited land and wealth. A man's value was measured not just by his title, but by his ability to produce heirs, to continue his family's line. His worth, like that of his wife, was tied to his ability to secure the future. A man's legacy would live on through his children, especially his sons. And so, he too had a role to fulfill, to provide, to protect, and to ensure the survival of the bloodline. In this world, love was secondary, but survival, duty, and legacy were all-consuming. A man and a woman might share a bed, but their union was not for pleasure. It was for the continuation of the family name, for the securing of wealth and land, for the performance of duty. To love, to desire, was to risk everything. But to fulfill one's role in marriage, to carry out the functions expected of them, was to ensure one's place in the world. And so, marriage was both a bond and a burden, a structure that held together the fragile threads of medieval society. It was an institution built on survival, not affection, where duty reigned supreme and love was a quiet whisper, too often ignored or buried beneath the weight of expectation. The real work of marriage, the true test of its success, lay not in romance, but in the ability to produce heirs, to continue the family name, to carry out the eternal cycle of life. In a world where survival was uncertain and the future always at risk, marriage was not about pleasure, it was about preserving the legacy of the family. The world of medieval medicine was a strange and unsettling one. where the boundaries between the mystical and the practical were often blurred. Physicians, though well-intentioned, held an understanding of the human body that was rooted in centuries-old beliefs, many of them strange and deeply misguided. Sexual medicine, in particular, was a field of mystery and trial. Though some physicians were learned in the teachings of ancient scholars, their knowledge of anatomy and the workings of the body was rudimentary at best. They knew little of the intricacies of the body's inner workings, but they spoke often of its great mysteries. To them, the body was a puzzle, an enigma to be solved, though their tools were often superstition, myth, and crude observation. The belief in the balance of humors, those invisible forces that controlled the body, governed much of their thinking. It was said that a man's strength and vitality, his very ability to perform in the marriage bed, was tied to his humors. The humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, had to be in balance for health to be maintained. If one of the humors became too dominant, the body would suffer, and the man's virility might fade. To cure such imbalances, physicians often prescribed remedies that ranged from the simple to the bizarre, bloodletting, purging, and the drinking of strange potions that promised to restore the body's natural balance. As for female sexuality, it was seen through a very different lens. The understanding of female anatomy was shadowed in ignorance and myth. Physicians often looked upon women's bodies with both awe and suspicion. Women were believed to be inherently colder than men, their bodies susceptible to wandering wombs and erratic humors. It was said that a woman's womb, that mysterious, unseen organ, could wander throughout her body, causing madness and hysteria when it grew restless. This wandering womb was often blamed for a woman's infertility, though there was no real understanding of the true causes. If a woman could not conceive, it was always her fault. The man, the divine bearer of the spark of life, could never be the one to blame. Infertility was always the woman's burden. The man's role was far simpler, or so they believed. He was seen as the bearer of the divine spark semen. The essence of life flowed through him, and it was his duty to ensure the continuation of the family line. A woman's womb, cold and mysterious, could only receive this seed and bring forth new life. If she failed, it was always because her body had failed to properly receive the divine gift. Thus, fertility was seen as a matter of divine will, and the idea that the man's seed could be faulty was never considered. Medieval physicians, in their pursuit of understanding and control, often turned to remedies that were equal parts science and superstition. Herbs, potions, and concoctions were commonly used to enhance fertility, boost virility, or soothe the pains of desire. These remedies were often brewed by the women of the household, who acted as midwives and healers, using the natural world to their advantage. A good healer would know the properties of hundreds of herbs, flowers, and roots, each one with a specific power to influence the body's humors and functions. For fertility, medieval people turned to the plants of the earth. Some remedies were simple: a handful of herbs boiled in water, a tonic to strengthen the body. Others were more complex and involved strange mixtures of animal parts, or even rare stones and metals. It was said that certain flowers, like pennyroyal, could help a woman conceive, while others, like mugwort, were thought to stimulate desire. The women of the time might gather basil or thyme, known for their warming properties, and brew them into a tea to aid fertility. Others turned to garlic, rosemary, and saffron, believing that their aromatic oils and medicinal qualities could help restore balance to a woman's body and encourage conception. But it wasn't just herbs that were used. Animal parts, too, were employed in strange and often unproven remedies. Testicles of boar or goat were ground into powders, meant to be consumed by men to boost their virility. The blood of a rooster, said to be potent and invigorating, was mixed with honey and other ingredients to create a drink that would enhance a man's sexual strength. For women, remedies often involved more complex combinations, sometimes calling for the crushed bones of a certain animal or the juice of a specific fruit. Some even turned to astrology, the belief that the stars and planets could influence the body's fertility and sexual health. The alignment of the planets, the position of the moon, these celestial forces, were thought to control the humors and guide the human body's natural processes. There were astrologers and healers who would calculate the perfect moment for conception, advising couples to wait for the right alignment of the stars before attempting to conceive. If a couple had trouble conceiving, some would suggest fasting or abstinence, believing that the body, in its purity, could find its balance again with time. These remedies, though often drawn from ancient traditions, were a blend of myth and practice. Some were effective, others were mere superstition. The line between medicine and magic was never very clear in the medieval world. The mysteries of the body were still just that, mysteries. The teachings of ancient physicians like Galen and Hippocrates were often mixed with Christian teachings, creating a world where faith and science intertwined. If a remedy did not work, it was not necessarily because it was wrong, but because God had chosen not to bless it. The healing powers of nature, the wonders of the natural world, were always at the mercy of divine will. In a world that knew so little of the true nature of sex and the body, medieval people were deeply dependent on these remedies and superstitions. It was a time when the soul and body were intertwined, and the physical world was seen as a reflection of the spiritual world. Desire, too, was seen through this lens, a natural part of life. Yes, but one that could lead to ruin if not properly controlled. Sexual desire was viewed as both a gift and a danger, something that could lead to pleasure and the creation of life, but also to sin and damnation. Sexual medicine was a means of controlling that desire, of attempting to balance the humors, of soothing the body and mind so that they might fulfill their destined roles in the world. But the most curious aspect of medieval medicine, perhaps, was its reliance on the unknown. The remedies and cures were as much about faith as they were about healing. Medieval people believed in the unseen forces of the world, spirits, demons, celestial bodies that guided their lives. They prayed to saints for assistance, burned candles to ward off evil, and trusted in the healing power of the natural world. And so, when the body failed them, when conception was delayed or desires went unfulfilled, they turned to these remedies not just for physical relief, but for hope. They were not only trying to restore balance to the body, but to the world itself. As strange as it might seem, the medieval approach to sexual health and fertility was a reflection of the larger worldview of the time. Life was a struggle between the physical and the spiritual, the known and the unknown. And while we now know more about the true workings of the body, the medieval people, in their search for answers, found solace in their belief that they were not alone in their suffering that nature, and the divine could still guide them. So, in the dim candlelight of their homes, in the quiet chambers of monasteries, and in the bustling marketplaces where remedies were sold, the people of medieval Europe continued their search for answers. And though many of their remedies were based on myth and superstition, their desire for health, for love, and for life was no less real. They lived in a world that understood the body in ways we might now find primitive, but in many ways, their approach was a reflection of the complexity of the human experience, the desire for balance, for control, and for the continuation of life itself. In the courts and castles of medieval Europe, there existed a peculiar kind of love, a love that, in its ideal form, never sought to be fulfilled, a love that never aimed for the warmth of a lover's embrace or the touch of a hand. This was courtly love, a concept born from the chivalric traditions of knights and nobles. It was a love that existed primarily in the realm of the heart, a love that transcended the physical world, existing solely in the quiet spaces between the words of a poem or the gentle strains of a lute. This love, though often passionate in its intensity, was always unattainable, and that, in many ways, was its allure. Courtly love was not a love based on the warm, simple pleasures of the flesh. It was a love marked by longing, distance, and the sweet agony of unattainability. A knight, bound by honor, might find himself captivated by a lady of the court, often a woman who was already married, and thus beyond his reach. This was the essence of courtly love. Love for the unattainable. Love that could never be truly fulfilled. The knight might pledge his undying loyalty to the lady, singing her praises in poems and songs, declaring his love for her in the public arena, but he was not to seek her in the bedchamber. No, his love was to be expressed through acts of chivalry, through the performance of noble deeds, and above all, through the endurance of longing. This love was a kind of ritual, a game played according to strict rules. The knight, in his devotion, was expected to serve his lady, though she often remained unaware of his adoration. She was to be the object of his worship, the focus of his longing. She, in turn, was expected to remain distant, to remain above him, almost untouchable. The knight's desire for her, however, was what elevated him, gave him purpose. In his desire, he found his nobility. His love was pure, elevated, spiritual, and yet it was a love filled with emotional suffering, a suffering that was both sacred and glorious. Longing was the essence of courtly love. The knight would often write songs or compose poetry, each word dripping with the pain of love unfulfilled. These poems, usually filled with exaggerated metaphors, described his heart as being pierced by arrows, his soul as being torn apart by the intensity of his longing. His lady, in turn, might never even know of his affection, and if she did, she was not expected to return it. Her role was to remain distant, to inspire his adoration but not to reciprocate it. The knight's task was never to win her, but to suffer in silence, to endure the pain of unattainable love without ever complaining. The suffering was sacred. It was, in a strange way, a way of proving his worth, his dedication, his devotion to her. And so, this ritualized love became a cornerstone of the chivalric code. The knight, in serving his lady, was also serving something much larger than himself. He was serving the ideals of honor, virtue, and nobility. His love, though it might never be returned, was a reflection of his own inner purity. The pain of courtly love was not seen as something to be avoided. Instead, it was a kind of purification, a trial of the heart. To suffer in silence, to love without expectation, was to prove one's worthiness as a knight. But as with all idealized notions, there was a stark contrast between the reality of courtly love and its lofty ideals. In practice, courtly love was often far more physical than the knights and poets would admit. Beneath the noble facade, the reality of love was not always about emotional suffering. There were those who, while adhering to the rules of courtly love, still found ways to act on their desires. After all, knights were still men, and women, even those married, were still human. The strict rules of courtly love, which forbade the consummation of the relationship, could not entirely suppress the natural urges of the body. In secret, knights and ladies alike often indulged in the very pleasures they were meant to avoid. The courtly love story, as told by poets, may have been a tale of longing and unfulfilled desire, but the lives of the people involved were often marked by moments of physical closeness, of stolen glances, and quiet touches. The love that could never be fully expressed in the open was often whispered in darkened corners, hidden behind closed doors. Though the knight might write poems of unattainable affection, there was a world of physical desire beneath the surface, where the rules of courtly love did not always apply. For some, courtly love was a game, a way to gain favor and status. The public display of affection, the idealized devotion, was often just as much about social standing as it was about real emotion. By serving a lady, a knight could elevate his status among his peers, earning the respect of his fellow men and securing his position in the court. The poems and songs, the acts of bravery and service, were often just as much about displaying one's worth as they were about expressing true love. And for the ladies of the court, their role was similarly tangled. They were expected to be the object of affection, but they were also often involved in the games of power that these relationships entailed. Their beauty, their allure, could secure the loyalty of knights and men, but they, too, were bound by the rules of propriety, expected to remain distant and untouched by the men who served them. But despite the hidden nature of many courtly love affairs, the idea of unattainable affection never fully disappeared. It lingered in the hearts of those who longed for something beyond the physical, who saw in the unattainable a kind of purity. Courtly love, with all its restrictions and contradictions, remained a powerful force in the culture of the time. It was a love that demanded suffering, that found beauty in unrequited desire, and that glorified the pain of yearning. Even if the knight's love was never returned, even if his lady remained cold and distant, there was honor in his suffering, a nobility in his longing. The story of courtly love, though it often played out in poetry and song, was more than just a literary device. It was a reflection of the way that people, especially men and women of high status, viewed love and relationships. It was about keeping the sacredness of love apart from the physical world, and it was also about the self-sacrifice of the lover, who was willing to suffer without reward, to love without hope of return. It was an idea that was as beautiful as it was painful, and it defined the way knights and ladies interacted with one another, even if the reality of their relationships was sometimes far more complex. For some, the rituals of courtly love brought meaning to their lives, allowing them to express the emotions they could not act upon. But for others, the idealized love became a cage, one that kept them bound to an unreachable dream. The tension between the public and private, between desire and restraint, was a constant undercurrent in the lives of those who adhered to this code. While some found joy in the purity of unattainable love, others found it a source of frustration. And all the while, the knight and the lady lived their lives in the light of courtly love, the one rule they could never break being that their love could never truly be realized. It was a love that could never be expressed in the fullness of the body, a love that could only live in the poetry and the song, but in the hearts of those who believed in it. It was a powerful force, one that transcended the physical and entered the realm of the soul. In this love, there was beauty, there was pain, there was nobility, and though it may have been idealized, even romanticized, courtly love remained a force in medieval life, as much a part of the human experience as any other form of affection. In the sprawling fields and shadowed corners of medieval Europe, where the land was as divided as the people who worked it, sexuality and power were intricately woven together. The nobility, with their lofty titles and grand estates, were positioned far above the peasants who toiled under their rule. This division was not merely one of social class, but one of authority. And in the world of the medieval lords and their serfs, the power imbalance shaped every aspect of life, including their sexual relations. In the high towers of castles, where the lords and ladies dressed in fine silks and velvet, the concept of ownership was not confined to land or wealth. The bodies of the peasants, particularly the women, were considered part of the property of the lord. The men, toiling in the fields, had little say in their fates, and the women, often treated as little more than tools for reproduction and labor, were subject to a different kind of rule, one that was tied to both social control and sexual exploitation. To those in power, the bodies of their serfs were an extension of their land, something to be managed, controlled, and, when necessary, exploited. Sexual exploitation was not an uncommon feature in the feudal system, though it was rarely discussed openly. The nobility wielded their power in every aspect of life, and for many lords, sexual relations were another tool in maintaining control over the serfs who worked their land. For those at the top of the social ladder, the rights of the body, particularly the bodies of the peasantry, were often seen as theirs to command. The concept of mutual consent, of individual autonomy, was foreign to this world. The peasants, bound by their birth and their labor, had no recourse to challenge the whims of their masters. The lord's right, the supposed right of a noble lord to take his peasant's bride on their wedding night, was one of the most infamous, though often debated, practices tied to this system. Though the truth of such a practice has been obscured by myth and the passing of centuries, it was a concept that spoke to the deeply entrenched gender and power imbalances of the time. This right, if it existed at all, was meant to assert the lord's dominance, not only over the land but over the very bodies of those who lived upon it. It was said that upon marriage, the newlywed couple, having exchanged vows, would be escorted to the bridal chamber. Before they could seal their union in the eyes of God, it was whispered that the Lord had the first claim on the bride. She was his property, after all, as much as the land or the livestock that were part of his holdings. To defy this right was, in some places, to risk the Lord's wrath. His power over the serfs was absolute, and even the sanctity of marriage was often subordinate to his will. Though there is scant evidence that this right was practiced as widely as legend suggests, it is clear that the notion of ownership over a woman's body was deeply ingrained in the feudal system. The concept that a woman could be claimed by her lord was rooted in the understanding that the serfs were tied to the land, and by extension, their bodies were bound to the land as well. This act, whether ceremonial or a rare occurrence, was a manifestation of the total dominance a lord held over his subjects. And it was not just about sexuality, it was about control. The lord's right to take the bride on her wedding night symbolized the full extent of his power, not only over the land, but over the very lives of those who lived upon it. In the eyes of medieval society, a woman's body was not her own. It belonged to her father until marriage, and then it belonged to her husband, or in the case of the peasantry, her lord. The idea that women could have autonomy over their own bodies was nearly unthinkable. This ownership, though rarely articulated in such terms, was at the heart of medieval sexual dynamics. A woman's value was tied directly to her reproductive capability, her ability to bear children, and more importantly, her ability to provide heirs for the family or estate. In this society, the sexual rights of women were intimately tied to property. They were part of the dowry, part of the transfer of wealth and land. A woman's body was a tool for producing heirs, and her value in the marriage market was not based on love or attraction, but on her ability to produce children, particularly sons, who could inherit the family estate and continue the bloodline. To be married was to become the property of another, first a father, then a husband, or, if the circumstances allowed, a lord. While the nobility might pass their lands and titles through their sons, it was the women who were seen as the bearers of these legacies. The political and economic importance of producing heirs lay solely on their shoulders. The pressure on women, particularly those of the upper class, was immense. They were expected to bear children, and most importantly, sons, and failure to do so could result in a loss of status, and in some cases, their marriage could be considered null and void. The concept of love was irrelevant to these unions. Women were married not for their personalities, their desires, or their companionship, but because they were necessary for the continuation of the bloodline, for the securing of land and wealth. The idea of sexual rights in the feudal system, therefore, was not simply about physicality, it was about ownership. A woman's body was a tool, a piece of property, meant to produce heirs and maintain the social order. A woman's desires or wishes were secondary to the duty of reproduction. Her worth was determined not by her individuality, nor by her mind, but by her ability to provide an heir to her husband's estate. In a society where the structure was rigid and immovable, where the lines of class and authority were clearly drawn, sexual relations, especially those of the peasantry, were just another way to assert dominance. The act of taking a peasant's bride was not about desire, but about power, the Lord's power over the land and the people who worked it. It was a means of reinforcing the Lord's dominance, a reminder to the peasantry that their bodies were just as much his property as the land they tilled. The moral implications of these acts were barely considered, for in the eyes of society, the Lord's right to the bride was simply another part of his social and political authority. Even for the men of the lower class, whose control over their own lives was limited, the idea of sexual rights was tied to the idea of ownership. The peasant, like the woman, was bound to the land, and though he may have been free to choose a wife, the union itself was dictated by the demands of property and survival. The marriage contract was not about love, but about ensuring the next generation of workers. Sexuality in this world was simply another tool in the system of control. The nobility held the power to define what was permissible, and the bodies of their subjects, both male and female, were their means of enforcing their will. Yet, despite these rigid structures, there were always those who found ways to break the rules, to subvert the system. Even within the confines of this rigid structure, there were whispers of rebellion. The Lord's right to the bride, while feared, was not always observed. In some cases, the power imbalance between the Lord and the peasantry led to situations of exploitation and abuse. And though society did not officially condone such acts, they were often tolerated as long as they did not threaten the broader social order. For the peasant, the weight of these expectations and the reality of their powerlessness must have been a constant strain. Their bodies, like their lives, were owned by another. Their sexual desires, their need for intimacy, were often disregarded, as the pressures of survival weighed more heavily on them. In the eyes of the nobility, the peasant's body was just another resource, something to be used, something to be controlled. And yet, even in this world of control and subjugation, there were those who defied the rules, found ways to experience the desires they were told to suppress. Sexuality, in this time, was a tool of control, a means of maintaining the social hierarchy. It was something to be used by those in power to reinforce their dominance. The bodies of women and peasants, like the land they worked, were part of the system of ownership. The notion of sexual rights was deeply tied to this system of control where one's body was not their own, but a tool for the service of a higher purpose. The continuation of family lines, the securing of land, and the maintenance of the feudal order. The Lord's claim to the peasant's bride was just one small example of the larger power dynamics that shaped the lives of medieval people where desire was not their own, but something to be controlled, regulated, and used by those with the power to do so. In the world of medieval Europe, where faith governed every aspect of life, and the lines between the earthly and the divine were often blurred, the concept of sexual deviancy was a fearful thing. These fears were not just about sin. They were woven into the fabric of society, deeply connected to the anxieties of the time. The threat of immorality, both real and imagined, hung heavy in the air. And in many ways, the most deviant acts were often scapegoats for larger societal unrest. These fears about bestiality, homosexuality, and even demonic influence were symbols of what was perceived as a breakdown in the social and divine order, and so they were used as tools of control, of fear, and of moral regulation. Among the most feared and reviled of acts was bestiality, the sexual relationship between a human and an animal. Though the practice was rare, it was deeply condemned, not just for the act itself, but for what it represented. Bestiality was seen as a corruption of the natural order, a perversion of the divine creation. It was the ultimate transgression against the body and nature, a violation of the boundaries between man, animal, and the divine. The Church, ever watchful for signs of moral decay, saw bestiality as a dangerous and contagious sin, one that threatened to undermine the social and spiritual fabric of society. When the crops failed or disease spread, the social unrest that followed was often accompanied by moral panic. Bestiality was frequently invoked as a scapegoat during times of crisis. People, desperate to make sense of their suffering, looked for answers in the darkness of the unknown and found them in the most heinous of acts. A single accusation of bestiality could cause widespread fear and lead to violent reprisals. It was a sin so revolting that it was used to explain away misfortune, to redirect the fear and anger of the people away from the failures of the human world and towards something more easily condemned. In times of widespread famine, when food was scarce and hunger gnawed at the bones of the people, the fear of bestiality was often magnified. The idea that humans might turn to animals for sexual satisfaction was used to explain not only the spiritual rot that had infected society, but also the tangible signs of decay, the sickness, the famine, the death. Bestiality was more than a moral issue. It became a symbol of everything that was wrong with the world. The connection between these acts and the larger societal troubles was never questioned. And so, the condemnation of such behavior became a form of social cleansing, a way to restore order and reaffirm the boundaries between the human and the non-human, the sacred and the profane. But alongside these fears of physical corruption, there was another anxiety, a fear of homosexuality. In a society built upon strict gender roles, where men and women had clear and distinct duties, any deviation from these roles was seen as dangerous. Homosexuality, or same-sex relations, was strictly forbidden by the Church. It was condemned as a grave sin that threatened the very fabric of society. But as with bestiality, the reality of same-sex relationships was far more complex than the official teachings allowed. Though the Church preached vehemently against homosexual acts, the truth was that such relationships, while kept hidden, existed all the same. Same-sex affection, though never openly acknowledged, was often present in the lives of men and women, particularly among the clergy, who were expected to live lives of celibacy but often fell short of that vow. In monasteries, where men lived together in close quarters, intimate bonds were formed, sometimes with a deep emotional attachment, though these were never spoken of openly. The language surrounding same-sex affection was often cloaked in euphemism and metaphor, with words like brotherly love or companionship, used to mask the true nature of the relationships. Homosexuality, though condemned by the Church, often existed beneath the surface, in the secret, hidden corners of society. The fear of it was not just a reflection of religious teaching, but also of the intense social control that shaped every aspect of life. To acknowledge that same-sex love could exist was to challenge the very foundations of the medieval world, where marriage and reproduction were seen as the natural order. For a society so dependent on the clear and strict roles of men and women, same-sex love was a threat to that order, a reminder that the boundaries between what was considered normal and deviant were not as rigid as they seemed. And then there were the demonic fears, the whispered rumors of incubi and succubi, demons believed to visit people in their sleep and sexually assault them in the night. These creatures, the incubi and succubi, were seen as manifestations of the most dangerous kind of desire that was uncontrollable and unholy. It was believed that these demons, often depicted as seductively beautiful or terrifyingly monstrous, would prey on the unsuspecting, draining them of their energy and their purity. The incubus, the male demon, was said to come to women in the night, while the succubus, the female demon, would visit men. These demons were feared for their ability to possess their victims, to control them through lust and desire. It was said that the incubi and succubi could not only ruin a person's soul but also bring physical harm. Nighttime visits from these demons were often used to explain the waking experiences of sexual dreams, particularly wet dreams or sexual dreams that left a person feeling drained and exhausted. A man who woke up after a particularly vivid dream might be convinced that he had been visited by an incubus, and similarly, a woman might fear that she had been assaulted by a succubus. These beliefs were pervasive, and in a world where so much of life was mysterious and uncontrollable, it was easy for people to blame such nighttime terrors on demons. The idea of being violated by a supernatural creature was far more comforting than acknowledging the very real human desires that might have been at play. The fear of these demons was a way to give form to the sexual anxiety that pervaded the medieval mind. It was a way of distancing oneself from the rawness of human sexuality, of creating a scapegoat for feelings that could not be explained. These demons, incubi and succubi, represented the ultimate fear of desire, the fear that it could not be controlled, that it could possess you, take you beyond the bounds of reason. They were the embodiment of sexual sin, of lust and temptation that could not be contained by the rules of society or the church. Their presence in the night was a reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the control of the individual, a reminder of how easily a person could be consumed by their own desires if they were not kept in check. Thus, the fears of bestiality, homosexuality, and the incubi and succubi were not just fears of specific acts, but fears of the uncontrollable. They spoke to a deeper, more pervasive fear that human desire, in all its forms, was something dangerous and wild, something that needed to be tamed and controlled. These fears were a way of maintaining the boundaries between the natural and the unnatural, between what was acceptable and what was sinful. They were tools used by the church and society to ensure that desire remained in its place, to ensure that the natural order of things was upheld, and to remind people that their bodies and their desires were not their own but were subject to higher powers, whether divine or societal. In the midst of these fears, the reality of human sexuality could not be fully contained. It existed, often in secret, hidden beneath the surface of the idealized medieval world. But even in the darkest corners, where demons and temptations roamed, the human spirit sought connection, sought release, sought to understand the mysteries of desire. And in that quiet rebellion, in those moments when the rules were broken, the true nature of medieval sexuality revealed itself not as something entirely wicked, but as something deeply human. The silence of the monastery was thick, the air heavy with the scent of incense and candle wax. Within these sacred walls, celibacy was the highest of callings, a vow that promised spiritual purity and closeness to God. To take the cloth, to don the robes of the clergy, was to separate oneself from the world of flesh and desire. For monks, and for nuns alike, the vow of chastity was a symbol of their dedication to a higher purpose. Theirs was a life devoted to prayer, contemplation, and self-denial. In the eyes of the church, they were meant to be the ideal, free from the temptations of the body, their spirits rising above earthly desires. And yet, despite this vow, many clergy members secretly violated their celibacy vows. Behind the stone walls of their sanctuaries, in the shadows of the cloisters, the men who preached restraint were not always able to follow their own commands. While they spoke of purity, many of these monks found solace in affairs with housekeepers, servants, or even visitors to the monastery. Their lust, long buried beneath the weight of their vows, could not always be suppressed. The church, ever wary of scandal, was forced to turn a blind eye. Sometimes these liaisons were simply tolerated, whispered about, but rarely punished. After all, these were men of the cloth, their authority above reproach. To question their actions was to question the very authority of the church itself. In this world, hypocrisy was often the price of maintaining control. The nuns, secluded in their convents, lived under even stricter scrutiny. Their lives were dedicated to chastity, to the preservation of their bodies as holy vessels for the service of God. Yet, like their male counterparts, they, too, struggled with the tension between the sacred vows they had sworn and the desires that stirred within them. In the quiet, isolated rooms of the convent, far from the prying eyes of the world, nuns sometimes formed bonds emotional and occasionally physical with one another. These bonds, though often unspoken, became a kind of rebellion, an unacknowledged escape from the strict vows they had been forced to take. For many, these relationships were a way to experience affection, tenderness, and love in a world where such emotions were forbidden. It was a delicate dance, a quiet subversion of the vow of chastity. The emotions between nuns, particularly those who shared rooms or who served closely together, were often intense. These feelings were not always acted upon, but in the warmth of companionship, a kind of intimacy bloomed. Some shared long walks in the garden, others whispered secrets beneath the covers at night, and still, others found ways to give each other comfort in the only way they knew how. In a world where physical touch was forbidden, the secret bonds of affection formed a quiet rebellion against the church's rigid rules. For some nuns, these relationships were a source of solace, a brief reprieve from the oppressive silence of their vows. But these connections, while real, were always hidden beneath layers of propriety. If discovered, they could be seen as sins, acts of disobedience against the divine law. In the eyes of the Church, any relationship that deviated from the prescribed ideals of chastity was seen as an affront to God. Nuns who fell into these emotional or physical entanglements risked their positions in the convent, and their very souls were in jeopardy. Yet, despite the risks, many women in these cloistered worlds found themselves drawn to one another in ways that went beyond simple friendship. These bonds, though never openly acknowledged, were a quiet testimony to the human need for connection, for love, for tenderness, even in the most restrictive of circumstances. This tension between the religious vows of chastity and the deeply human desires of the clergy and nuns was a constant undercurrent in the medieval church. The church's obsession with virginity and purity was not simply about devotion to God, it was about control. By demanding celibacy, the church sought to establish a direct line between the clergy and God, ensuring that the clergy were free from earthly distractions. Yet, in doing so, it placed an impossible burden on the very people who were meant to serve as the spiritual guides of society. The church's desire to control not just the behavior but the very sexual identity of men and women was part of a larger system of social and spiritual control. Virginity, for women, was the highest form of purity. It was a state to be preserved and, when possible, to be celebrated. The idea that a woman could be untouched, unmarred by the desires of the flesh, was seen as the highest expression of her devotion. Virginity was not just a matter of sexual purity, it was the mark of a woman's worth in a world that placed little value on her intellect or her will. Women who entered convents were not simply taking vows of chastity, they were submitting their bodies to the will of the church, becoming living symbols of purity and submission. The act of entering the convent was a way of erasing a woman's sexual identity, of rendering her body neutral, untouched, and pure. She became a vessel, not for her own desires, but for the desires of the church. Her body was no longer her own. It belonged to God and to the institution. The ideal woman in the eyes of the church was one who had surrendered her body completely, who had forsaken the very possibility of physical pleasure. But even in this world, the reality of desire could not be fully suppressed. The church might demand celibacy and chastity, but the human spirit could not be so easily contained. The monks and nuns who walked the halls of their monasteries and convents bound by vows of silence and prayer, were still human. They still experienced longing, affection, and, in some cases, lust. In the cold stone walls of the convent, where silence was a constant companion, the warmth of human connection was deeply desired. For some, this meant finding solace in the friendships they formed with one another, while for others, it meant quietly breaking their vows in secret acts of rebellion. These secret rebellions were not often spoken of aloud, and in many cases, they were never discovered. But they existed, woven into the lives of those who had been taught to repress their desires. The tension between the sacred and the profane was always present, and in the silence of the convent and the monastery, the struggle between faith and flesh was never far from the surface. Despite the strictness of the vows, the human heart could not be ignored. The Church's control over the bodies of its clergy was, in many ways, a reflection of its larger goal to control every aspect of life, from birth to death, and to dictate how individuals should live, think, and behave. But in the hearts of the monks and nuns, there were desires that could not be quelled, feelings that could not be erased. Theirs was a life of contradiction, devotion to God, yet bound by the same desires that all humans share. In the quiet of the convent, the monastery, and the abbey, these contradictions lived side by side, a reminder that even in the strictest systems of control, the human spirit could not be fully contained. For some, the struggle was too great. They left their vows, abandoning the quiet life of prayer for the freedom to live and love as they wished. For others, the struggle continued in silence, hidden away in the shadows, where desire and faith mingled in quiet rebellion. And still, for many, the Church's obsession with virginity and purity was a defining force, shaping their lives in ways that were often invisible, yet deeply felt. Their bodies, their desires, and their very identities were dictated by an institution that sought to control them. And yet, despite it all, the human heart could not be silenced. Desire lived on, quietly, secretly, but always present in the lives of those who sought purity, but could never escape the flesh. In the bustling streets of medieval cities, where the scent of roasting meat mixed with the tang of river water, there existed places of commerce that many would rather forget. Yet, despite their unseemly nature, these establishments played a pivotal role in the fabric of urban life. Brothels, though often whispered about in hushed tones, were openly operating, woven into the very heart of city life. They were part of the urban landscape, regulated, taxed, and officially sanctioned by both the state and the Church. The red light districts, though often seen as places of vice and sin, were also integral to the economy and social structure of medieval cities. The brothel was a curious institution, both shunned and essential. On one hand, it was a symbol of the city's moral decay, a place where lust was sold, and the body was bartered for coin. On the other hand, it was a regulated space, where taxes were collected, rules were enforced, and the law turned a blind eye to the realities of sexual commerce. In a world where morality was constantly under the watchful eye of the Church, brothels were a necessary evil. They provided a release for the growing population of men who sought comfort beyond the reach of their wives, and they served as a space where sexual desires could be fulfilled outside the bounds of marriage. Yet, despite their recognition in the eyes of the law, brothels were stigmatized. Prostitutes, often referred to as camp followers or tavern women, were seen as fallen women, their worth reduced to the services they provided. They were often relegated to the margins of society, with few rights, few protections, and little opportunity for advancement. These women were often poor, cast aside by the same society that profited from their labor. Their lives were ones of struggle, marked by physical and emotional tolls that came with the work they did. Sex, in this world, was business. Brothels were not just places of forbidden pleasure. They were functioning institutions, tax-paying entities that contributed to the economy of the city. Prostitution was not viewed purely as a sin, but as a necessary service, one that met a very real need. As cities grew, with their burgeoning merchant classes and armies of soldiers, the demand for sex work increased. Prostitutes filled an essential role, providing sexual release for men who might otherwise turn to other forms of release, sometimes violent, sometimes criminal. The business of sex was deeply intertwined with the fabric of medieval life. The brothels themselves were often located in the less respectable areas of the city, sometimes near taverns or marketplaces where the traffic of men was constant. Inside the brothel, women offered their services for a price, a simple transaction that, despite its societal stigma, was not looked down upon by those in power. In fact, brothels were often tolerated by the church, provided they were kept within certain bounds, and the prostitutes who worked within them were not overly visible. In some cities, brothels were even licensed, with strict rules governing their operation. The women working within these spaces, though viewed with contempt by much of society, were still part of a system that, in many ways, relied on them. The role of women in brothels was complex. On one hand, they were essential to the economic functioning of the city, but on the other, they were treated with harsh judgment. They were often depicted as immoral, as sinful creatures, their worth measured solely by the services they provided. Their sexuality was commodified, and they were forced to live within a system that offered them no other choice. The fact that they could not be seen as fully human in society's eyes was both a reflection of their social and economic marginalization and a testament to the deeply ingrained double standards of medieval life. Men, on the other hand, were afforded far more freedom. The act of patronizing a brothel was not viewed as shameful for a man. Rather, it was seen as a natural outlet for his desires. The hypocrisy of this system was clear. Men could indulge in their sexual desires without fear of judgment, while women who provided the same service were shunned and labeled as outcasts. This double standard reflected the broader inequalities of medieval society, where women were expected to adhere to strict codes of behavior, while men were granted far more latitude to act according to their desires. There are those who have debated the nature of brothels, wondering whether they served as a form of empowerment or exploitation for women. Some argue that, for many of the women involved, brothels provided a form of independence, allowing them to earn a living in a world where options for women were often limited. They had, in many cases, more autonomy than other women of their social class, who were often forced into marriages for economic reasons. In a sense, the brothel provided them a form of freedom, even if that freedom came at a great personal cost. But the darker truth remains. Brothels were exploitative. Women who worked within them often had no other choice but to submit to the demands of their patrons. Their bodies were controlled by the owners of the brothels, and their futures were limited by the same system that oppressed them. They were subjected to physical and emotional abuse, with little recourse for justice or protection. The life of a prostitute in medieval Europe was one marked by suffering, and the social stigma attached to their work made it all the more difficult for them to find any form of dignity or respect. And yet, despite the harsh realities of their lives, these women still played an essential role in the functioning of the medieval city. They were vital to the economy, to the soldiers who came through the gates, to the merchants and travelers who passed through. Without them, the cities might have been forced to confront the deeper social problems of desire, temptation, and control. In the face of this, the brothels became a necessary evil, not just places of sin, but of survival. Not just places of indulgence, but of human need. Brothels existed in hidden corners of society, in places where the sacred and the profane intertwined, where sexuality was both a business and a moral transgression. The women who worked there, though often marginalized, were indispensable to the functioning of urban life. And though they were often forgotten or ignored, Their stories were woven into the very fabric of the cities they inhabited. For these women, the brothel was both a prison and a refuge. It was a place where they could, if only briefly, find some form of agency in a world that denied them nearly everything else. The twin realities of brothels in medieval cities, the business of sex, and the moral judgment that came with it, reflected the complexities of the time. On one hand, they were accepted, even regulated. On the other, they were steeped in shame. The women who worked in them, though often pushed to the margins of society, were still part of its machinery, necessary and vital. Yet, despite their importance, they remained judged, ignored, and scorned, a bitter reminder of the inequalities and hypocrisy that defined the medieval world. As the night settled over the city and the brothels closed their doors, the world outside continued on. The streets were quieter now, the lamps casting long shadows, but the silent truth remained. The brothels would open again tomorrow, and in their quiet corners, the women would continue their work, their lives hidden from the judgmental eyes of society, but no less important for the roles they played in the great dance of life. In the quiet, sacred halls of medieval monasteries, where the air was thick with the scent of ink and parchment, a strange and unexpected rebellion took place. While the monks and scribes toiled over the holy texts, their hands guided by the dictates of the church, they would often pause in the margins, in the hidden corners of the page, to leave behind something that contradicted their vows of chastity. The sacred words, carefully copied, would often be accompanied by whimsical and sometimes crude drawings, images of sexual acts, playful depictions of bodies entwined in ways the church would surely have condemned. These erotic images, tucked into the margins of religious manuscripts, served as an outlet for desires that could not be expressed openly. In a world where every aspect of life was dictated by the church's rules, where bodies were not to be enjoyed but subdued, these drawings were a small, silent rebellion. The act of adding such erotic imagery to sacred texts was a subtle form of subversion. It was as if the scribes could not contain their repressed desires, and so, in the margins of holy books, where the sacred words were meant to be preserved, they instead revealed the true, hidden nature of the men who wrote them. The images were often small, easily overlooked by the unknowing reader, but they were there, waiting to be discovered. There, amid the elaborate illuminations of saints and angels, one might find playful depictions of naked bodies, men and women engaged in intimate acts, often in exaggerated or grotesque forms. These images, crude and sometimes humorous, were a way for the monks to express what they could not say aloud. The monks, in their silence, their vows of chastity, found a quiet release in these drawings. In the same way they prayed, seeking forgiveness for their sins, they also expressed their forbidden desires through art. Erotic marginalia, as it came to be called, was not just an expression of sexual longing. It was a form of satire and rebellion against the sexual repression of the time. The church, which demanded celibacy, which condemned the body as a vessel of sin, was also the very institution that inadvertently gave rise to these images. The sacred and the profane coexisted in the margins of manuscripts, where the divine and the human were not separate, but entangled in the most intimate of ways. What is perhaps most striking about these images is that they were not merely about desire, they were a commentary on the very structure of the church's teachings. They were, in many ways, a quiet critique, a whispered joke among the scribes. The church demanded chastity, yet it could not suppress the very instincts that made one human. In the margins of their manuscripts, the monks acknowledged this contradiction. They drew what they were told to suppress, as if to say, "Yes, we follow your rules, but we know the truth of human nature. We know the desires that stir within us, and we cannot escape them." In a world where desire was seen as sinful, these drawings became a hidden release valve, a small way to express what could not be spoken. These marginal images often took on the form of humor. The depictions were not always beautiful or sensual in the traditional sense. Instead, they were crude and exaggerated, their humor often bordering on the ridiculous. Men with impossibly large genitals, women with exaggerated breasts, and lovers caught in awkward, improbable poses. These were the scenes that played out in the margins, hidden in plain sight. They were often playful, mocking the very idea of sexual restraint, as if to say, "Here, in the sacred space of this holy book, we defy your rules. We acknowledge the absurdity of our desires, and we find joy in it." These drawings were a release not just for the men who drew them, but for the society that lived under the weight of repression. They were a safe place to laugh at the very ideas that had been drilled into the people for centuries. For the common folk, the monks' drawings were a quiet expression of the humanity that was denied them, a reminder that even those who had sworn to suppress their desires could not escape the natural forces of human nature. Art, in this sense, was a form of rebellion. It was not just a way to explore forbidden pleasure, but a means of defying the structures of control that sought to regulate every aspect of human life. In some ways, these erotic images were a paradox, both a form of rebellion and a form of submission. The monks, bound by their vows, could not directly act upon their desires, but through these images, they could communicate what was unspoken, what the church refused to acknowledge. These drawings were small acts of defiance, but they also showed how deeply the church's teachings had infiltrated the minds of the people. Even in their rebellion, they were still bound by the very rules they sought to mock. The erotic imagery that found its way into the margins of sacred texts became, in a sense, a language of its own. It was a language of desire, but also of fear. For those who saw it, these images spoke not only to the sexual needs of the monks, but also to their deeper psychological struggles. They were not just artists drawing for pleasure, they were men caught in a tug-of-war between their spiritual duties and their human desires. These drawings were, in many ways, a reflection of the struggle between the sacred and the profane, between the soul and the flesh, a reflection of the human condition itself. In a society where every aspect of life was governed by the church's rules, where even love was regulated and sex was a sin, these images were a silent testament to the frustrations of being human. They were a small rebellion in a world that sought to silence natural desires. And for those who found solace in these images, whether they were the monks who drew them or the few who might have seen them, they were a quiet reminder that, despite the laws of the church, the human body and its desires could never truly be controlled. Thus, marginalia became a small, hidden form of liberation, a release from the confines of chastity and repression. These crude drawings were not just acts of sexual expression, but acts of self-expression. They were a reflection of the human need to be seen not just by God, but by one another. They revealed the desire to laugh at the seriousness of the world, to find humor in the absurdity of sexual restraint. The monks, who spent their days in prayer and silence, found their voice in the margins, in the small spaces where the sacred and the profane could dance together. In these hidden corners of religious manuscripts, the truth of human nature was laid bare. The desires that were forbidden were drawn out in the most simple, playful forms. The sacred space of the manuscript became a space of rebellion, where the body could speak freely, where desire could be acknowledged without shame. These small, often humorous drawings were a silent protest, an act of defiance against the rigidity of the church's teachings. They reflected the reality of life, a reality that the church tried so hard to suppress, and in doing so, they gave a voice to the desires that had been silenced for so long. The marginalia was a release, a small yet powerful reminder that even in the most restrictive of times, desire could not be entirely erased. It would always find a way to be seen, even if it was hidden in the margins. Medieval Europe was a world steeped in contradictions, a place where the desires of the human body constantly collided with the strict teachings of the Church. The Church, with its towering cathedrals and far-reaching influence, worked tirelessly to suppress sexual desires, declaring them sinful and dangerous, a threat to the soul's salvation. In this world, celibacy was revered, and chastity was demanded from everyone, priests, nuns, and lay people alike. The body was viewed with suspicion, and sexuality was framed as a temptation, something that had to be controlled if one were to achieve spiritual purity. Yet, despite all of this, human nature found a way to break free. It was as if desire could not be entirely repressed, as if the body, so carefully regulated by religious and societal rules, had a will of its own, a will that could not be ignored. At the heart of medieval sexuality was the competing tension between divine command and human impulse. The Church might have declared lust a sin, but that did not mean people did not desire. The contradictions between the ideal of spiritual purity and the reality of human longing played out every day in the lives of the people, especially in the hidden spaces of their relationships, in the secret liaisons, the forbidden love, and the quiet acts of rebellion. The laws of the Church might have sought to control every aspect of life, marriage, reproduction, and even pleasure itself, but the human heart remained untamed, always yearning for connection, for intimacy, for freedom. In the world of the medieval knight, love was a sacred, unattainable ideal. Courtly love, that idealized, chaste form of affection, demanded that the knight serve his lady from a distance, offering up his devotion without the expectation of physical fulfillment. It was a love of longing, of emotional suffering, a way to elevate the knight to a higher, almost divine status. Yet, beneath the poetry and the songs, the reality was often far more physical. The ideal of unattainable love was a romantic fantasy, but the desire for physical connection could not be entirely avoided. The rules of courtly love may have forbidden it, but the physical needs of the body remained constant. The knight, despite his vows of service and devotion, was still a man, and as such, he found ways to express his longing in secret, in stolen moments of affection, perhaps even in fleeting encounters that went against the very principles of the chivalric code. Marriage, in contrast, was a far more pragmatic institution. For many, it was not about love, but about duty, a duty to bear children, to continue the family line, to secure wealth, and to ensure that the estate remained in the hands of those who held the title. Women, particularly, were expected to bear children, to reproduce heirs to carry on the legacy of the family. In the feudal system, women were often little more than property, their value tied to their ability to produce heirs. Their bodies were seen as tools, meant for reproduction, for marriage, and for serving the needs of the family or lord. Love had little place in this equation. Yet, despite this, there were moments of tenderness, of connection, and even, occasionally, affection between spouses. The realities of marriage, particularly for women, were harsh and full of sacrifice, but human nature still found ways to experience intimacy and pleasure in the midst of those pressures. For the clergy, the ideals of chastity and celibacy were even more strictly enforced. The Church demanded that those who dedicated their lives to God should refrain from the pleasures of the flesh altogether, living lives of purity and service. Yet, as the centuries went on, it became clear that even the most devout of monks and priests could not entirely suppress their desires. Affairs, liaisons, and forbidden love were common among the clergy, as men of faith struggled to live up to the very vows they had taken. In this world of strict rules and rigid control, the desire for human connection and physical intimacy was simply too powerful to ignore. The secret rebellions of the monks, the hidden affairs, and the emotional bonds formed between nuns and other women in convents spoke to the deep human need for love and affection, a need that could not be entirely denied, no matter how hard the church tried to suppress it. In the brothels of the medieval cities, the tension between the sacred and the profane was even more pronounced. Brothels, though often shunned by polite society, were openly accepted and even regulated by both the state and the church. Sex work, in this world, was not just tolerated, it was recognized as a necessary evil, essential to maintaining the moral order of the cities. Prostitutes, known as camp followers or tavern women, were an integral part of urban life, fulfilling the desires of men who could not find satisfaction within the confines of marriage. The church, despite its teachings on the evils of lust, could not fully ignore the reality of human need. Brothels were tax-paying institutions, and though they were often stigmatized and their workers harshly judged, they were still a part of the fabric of urban society. In this world of contradictions, there was a delicate balance between sexual desire and social control. The church may have sought to control every aspect of human sexuality, but human nature found a way to break free. The marginalia in religious manuscripts, the erotic drawings tucked into the corners of sacred texts, were evidence of this. Monks and scribes, working diligently on their manuscripts, would often add small, hidden drawings, depictions of sexual acts, crude and humorous, often as a form of rebellion against the repression of the time. These drawings were a way for the men who swore celibacy to express the desires that could not be openly acknowledged. Sexuality was repressed, but it could not be eradicated. In the margins of sacred texts, the truth of human nature came to light, a small, secret rebellion against the constraints placed upon the body. Medieval sexuality, as we have seen, was not a simple matter of right and wrong, sin and virtue. It was a complex tapestry, full of contradictions and paradoxes. While the church and society worked tirelessly to control and suppress sexual desires, human nature found ways to break free. The rules of marriage, the vows of celibacy, and the repression of sexuality created a world full of hidden desires, secret liaisons, and forbidden love. The complexities of sexuality in the medieval world shaped not only the lives of the people who lived through it, but also the very cultural and political fabric of the time. The church's obsession with virginity and purity, the sexual exploitation in the brothels, the emotional and physical bonds formed by monks and nuns, all of these elements came together to form a world where desire could not be easily suppressed. Despite the harsh rules and the moral panics of the time, medieval people still managed to find ways to experience pleasure, rebellion, and intimacy. In the margins of manuscripts, in the hidden corners of monasteries, in the whispered secrets between lovers, the truth of human sexuality shone through. The longing, the suffering, and the forbidden pleasures were all part of a larger story, one that reflected the unbreakable connection between the body and the soul, between desire and control, between the sacred and the profane. And so, we look back on this complex landscape with a deeper understanding of the contradictions and conflicts that shaped the medieval world. Medieval sexuality was a world of repression and release, of desire and denial, of power and subjugation. Yet, for all the efforts to control and suppress it, desire that most human of emotions could not be extinguished, it found its way, time and time again, into the lives of the people, in their relationships, their art, their rebellion, and their desires. Desire, in the end, could not be so easily suppressed. It is a force that transcends time, transcends culture, and binds us all together in our shared humanity. Thank you for taking this journey with me through the hidden corners of medieval sexuality. If you have enjoyed this exploration into the complexities of desire in the past, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where do you think the tension between repression and desire shaped other parts of history? I would love to hear your thoughts. And as always, I am grateful to have you join me in exploring the untold corners of history. Until next time, my friends, take care, and may your curiosity continue to guide you through the past.